You might think that when you sit down to tune your drum and you're working with your batter head that that's the only effect you're having on that instrument, but there's a ghost in this machine that's been driving us crazy constantly until fairly recently, and we're going to explain it to you. Today we're going to approach this a little bit differently and walk you through the process that we just did to get our result rather than talking about it up front. We're going to start with installing our snare side head and bringing it up to a usable tension and giving that a listen. Just to be super specific, we're actually using a drum dial today to understand exactly where we're at, and where we're starting is with a 72 on this head for those of you that use one of these. The specific number that we're starting with is not actually important for any part of this experiment. This is just so that we have a baseline to measure against for what's about to happen. Now we're going to flip the drum over and bring the batter head up to the tension that I want to use today. Incidentally, I'm feeling a little bit zingy today, so we're going all the way up to a 91. All right, it sounds fabulous. It sounds exactly like I wanted, but something has changed. Do you know what it was? Let's check the snare side head real quick. Now that we've tensioned up the batter side, we're getting a different reading on the snare side. We started out with a 72 and now it's reading a 74. For anyone that hasn't ever used a drum dial before, we've been very surprised at the resolution on this. 2 on a drum dial is actually a pretty big difference. Listen to the comparison between these two tensions. That's enough that if I wanted one of them and I had the other, I would probably change it because a whole step, that's a lot. What's going on here is this drum has lugs that are connected physically. It's one piece, so we have tension rods going into both sides all the time. Despite the fact that they're attached firmly to the shell, this has nothing to do with the kind of drum this is, what the shell's made out of, what the lugs are made out of. That they're connected means that if we add tension to one side, mechanically, we are adding tension to the other. This style of lug is super common with snare drums. In fact, every snare drum you see right now has some version of this style of lug attached to it. Toms and bass drums, it's less common. It happens sometimes, but definitely not the primary place you're going to see this. Now, having said that, when we take into account the mass difference between a snare side head and the average snare batter head, even a simple 10 mil like this, you're getting pretty dramatic differences, especially at these very high tensions. The best way to describe this phenomena is like a game of tug of war with two people pulling on a rope and trying to pull the other one over. Every time we add tension on one side, some of that tension is getting transferred to the other side, and we can end up in a tug of war going up and down trying to get these to the tension that we're after, particularly if we're trying to follow some kind of prescription or number that we're aiming for. Now, because we can, let's raise the tuning on the batter even more than this and see what that does to the tension on the snare side. Okay, now we're really in the stratosphere here. We're tuned super duper high. The batter is measuring a 93, and the snare side has also gone up from a 74 to a 75. Incidentally, One of the lugs on the bottom of the drum actually went up to a 76 rather than a 75, which just goes to show you that there are a lot of variables going on here in the midst of fine tuning that we really can't plan or account for until we really get into the numbers and the tones. This phenomena really came to light for us recently in a comparison video that we did where we had 4 virtually identical drums in terms of dimensions and hardware and the rest of it, and also identical heads, and we were trying to get them all the same. And as we were going along, little adjustments were causing other things to change throughout the process, which turned it into a much more laborious activity than we had realized going in. We felt really compelled after that to share this information with everyone out there because it really drove us nuts. And forget even for a second that we're doing a whole head. If you're adjusting one lug, it means you're adjusting that one on the other side as well. So all of this needs to get taken into account as you're moving through and trying to clear these heads and get the sound you're after. There is one more variable that we do need to address, and it is that today we're using a very standard 10 mil head. If you're using a thinner head or a thicker head, your mileage is absolutely going to vary, particularly if you're moving to something thicker or a lot thicker. As we know from past experiences and just physics in general, thicker heads require more tension to achieve the same pitch as a thinner variant. This means that if we have something really beefy on here, to get it to the pitch that I'm using right now, the tension is going to be dramatically higher, which is going to mean a much more dramatic pull on the other head, and all of these phenomena are going to be more drastic than we are experiencing right now. One of the things that is saving us in this particular situation is that we didn't start out with tuning the snare side head super duper tight. We stuck to something in the medium range so that we would have some wiggle room afterward. If you are reefing the snare side head and then adding all of this tension to the batter, that head is getting even higher than you already put it when you thought to yourself, tabletop tight's the way to go. This is one more reason in the big bucket of reasons to not start out with maximum tension on the snare side, because anything you do to the batter is going to be affecting it, and we need to be able to account for that. Surely now you're screaming at the screen, how do I account for this? This is madness. Well, the way to account for this is to start out with pitching up the batter head up to the range that you want it to be before you add any tension to the snare side head at all. Essentially do what we did today, but in reverse. The reason why we would do this is because given that the snare side head is so much thinner, it's going to have a much smaller effect on the tension of the batter than if we do it the other way around. The other step to keep in mind is to make sure that anytime you're making adjustments to one of the heads, even if you don't feel like you need to be raising or lowering the overall pitch of the other head, turn the drum over and check in with that head and make sure that it's maintaining its stability, because again, if you're just adjusting one, that one on the other side could be getting moved a little bit, and it's worth checking in and making sure that it's not going out as you're making adjustments on the other side of the drum. This is one of the root causes that leads to endless frustration for people who are trying to get into tuning, get better at tuning, and go after a sound that they're looking for, purely because they don't realize that they're working with a variable in their midst that they don't realize is there. This drove me crazy for years before I figured out what was going on. It really was a ghost in the machine and made me second guess my abilities more than a few times. So hopefully this is going to make it clear that this is a physical thing that's going on, and it's definitely something that you can manage. When you sit down to experiment with this, remember that this is an opportunity to maybe realize that you're not crazy, there isn't actually a ghost in your drum, and that it's just one fairly small thing that we can account for as we're moving through tuning to make sure that we're staying on track and not having things change that we don't realize.